Are you tired of putting in effort only to feel like success is just out of reach? I know it's a frustrating cycle, and despite our best efforts, we always feel that our actions fall short of our expectations. What if I told you there was a secret that lies in the success, not in the action, but actually in the setup? Imagine a world where success comes effortless, and with every move you make is strategic and leads you to victory. Let's uncover the simple shift that can transform your approach to success. In this video, we'll explore the setup paradox, the art of winning before you even begin. Hey there, I'm Anthony Samuel. I'm a trained scientist with a passion for leadership, and this channel is a documentation of me and my journey to becoming the best leader on the planet. Let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about 6 ways that you can win before you even begin with the setup paradox. Now, the action is the sexy part, and that's the part that everyone sees. You know, the game winner buzzer beater, the standing ovation, or the pat on the back from your manager after you've led a meeting when they say, "Hey, nice meeting today." All actions have a phase before the execution, and that is where the real action is, in the setup. Today, we're going to talk about 6 ways you can be better prepared and a better executioner by mastering the setup. Number 1 is to create space for the action. Now, space is a very interesting thing because nothing's happening in the space, but it creates space for the action to happen. So the analogy that we used earlier about the buzzer beater is a lot of basketball players will use what's called a step back. And a step back is when you're dribbling and then you step back to create space, not to be closer toward the goal, but so you can see the goal better with the space that you created for yourself. Now, we're not all basketball players and we're not 6'9" and can dribble between our legs, but in your real life, this is what it will look like. Let's say you've been working on being patient with your child. Your child comes home with a bad grade today and you don't respond negatively this time, and you don't yell, you don't scream, you talk to them and you try and see their point of view. They go to the room, and about 15 minutes later, they come back and they tell you that the reason why they've been performing poorly is because they need glasses and they can't see. When you create space for things to happen, you create an environment for something new, something safe, something positive, something different than what was happening before. The second element of the setup paradox is creating a smooth transition from one side of the spectrum to the other. And this spectrum can be whatever you want. Analogy, a lot of our makeup wearers will like is, I learned that makeup has this thing called primer. And primer is what the user would put on their face prior to the rest of their makeup. And what it does is it creates a surface for the makeup to blend and be applied smoothly onto the skin better. What this looks like in your real life is that you will be preparing for a meeting. And you've prepared for the meeting, you've created an agenda, and you've sent out this agenda 24 hours before the meeting starts. You've identified the decision makers, advisors, the informants, and the meeting has already been set up for success before the meeting has even begun. You get into the meeting, and each decision is just flowing from one to the other. Everyone knows their role, everyone knows what they need to do, and everyone is present. And you have a very effective meeting, and people come up to you and go, "Wow, you ran a very good meeting." And it's not that you ran a good meeting, it's that the meeting was set up properly before the meeting even began. So this is my favorite one, is creating transitions, because life is just a series of transitions. And the better that you can create a smooth transition from one point to another is the easier your life will be, and the faster you will progress and evolve through whatever journey that you're going through. Number 3 is another one of my favorites, and that's thinking like the target. And we like to call this empathy. Empathy is a really important concept because a lot of people think that empathy is putting yourself in another person's shoes. But empathy is really putting yourself as the other person in the other person's shoes. So rather than thinking like yourself in the other person's shoes, you need to think like they would think in the other person's shoes. And a perfect analogy is, for all of our fishers out there, is placing the right bait on the pole before you hit the water. For our fishers, this looks like placing the correct bait on the pole prior to you even getting out to the pond or the ocean or whatever body of water you're fishing in. And as you fishers know, in fishing, you need to choose the correct type of bait to get the desired fish that you want. You can be the best fisherman in the world, you can have the best pole, the most expensive pole, be in the right place at the right time, but if you're not placing the correct bait for the fish that you want to catch, then you're going to be out of luck. So in real life, this looks a little different because, one, people are a little bit more complex than fish. But let's say you have a high performer and for years they've been performing at a high level, but recently they've decreased in their productivity. So you schedule a one-to-one with them and you discuss what you can do to help them. So you call a one-to-one meeting with them and you're discussing what you can do to help them. In your other strategy meetings, you remember that some of the other line managers have tried to offer them more money or try to offer a promotion or a new opportunity, but you don't really want to take a raise off the table because you don't want to become another statistic. I learned this from Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm a big fan of his. I wish he was a big fan of mine. I'm a very big fan of his, and he really preaches this: is find out what motivates people. And now it's time for the meeting, and rather than taking the previous steps of previous line managers who have lost their high performers by immediately trying to assume what they want, you ask your high performer, "Hey, what's going on? Why have you? It seems like you've lost motivation. Is there anything that we can do to reignite that flame?" And top performer says that they have a new addition to the family and they don't really want to be the CEO of the company anymore. But you had your bait ready. You didn't automatically throw in the raise. You didn't automatically throw in a new promotion because maybe that's not what the person wanted. So knowing knowing what you're trying to catch is a very important part of executing well because you're prepared. The fourth element of a good setup is eliminating the trigger. And really eliminating the trigger is really just identifying the indicators that happen before the event could happen. So what this looks like in real life is, let's say you're in a relationship and your relationship is kind of in a rut and you find yourself and your partner, you're arguing a lot and you're fighting over the same thing. It's so predictable that you could almost record the fight and put it on the TV and press play, and it would be the same exact fight each time. You both know what to say to rile each other up. But this time, rather than feeding into the fight, you look at the environment. What are the possible triggers of the fight? What happens before the fight happens? And you realize that this argument only happens when the house smells like trash. And when your spouse comes home, the first thing that they smell is the garbage that's been stenching all day long in your house. So this time you decide that you're going to take the garbage out in the morning before your spouse comes home, and suddenly the argument that you used to have no longer happens, not because the person has changed, but because you have changed the environment for the action to happen. The fifth element of the setup is simply investing into today so you can have the payoff of tomorrow. A perfect analogy for this is your health, fitness, and finance. Everyone has been highly aware of the stock market now. The stock market has more readily available information than it ever has before. But that's just one example of compounding and just continually doing the small things add up to one big thing later on. But in a more practical sense, this looks like the thousands of hours that an athlete has put into the gym before they hit the game-winning shot. This looks like a speaker who has practiced and rehearsed their speech at the 15,000 member audience. This looks like a person who has a big meeting with big stakeholders coming up and they nail the meeting and everyone is just put in awe, but they don't realize that you have combed through the presentation, every slide, every image, every figure to create the perfect story for your stakeholders. Sometimes this is not as obvious as you compound up into a big event. Let's just say that you've developed a very close relationship with a business partner over the last 5 years. You guys have a great relationship. You've always provided great quality service to them, but you have a new employee and your new employee messes it up. They have an order, the order is poor quality, and they just mess it up. Without the prior investment of the relationship, that could have been a relationship-ending event. And everyone knows what that looks like. If you've ever been broken up with or you break up with someone, you know that there is an event in time where you go, this is not going to work out. So sometimes the setup is not immediately after the action, but the investment for the future. Visualization for the future. Number 6, your brain actually uses the same area of the neurons in your brain when you are experiencing something and when you are remembering something. So a visualization is almost like you are replaying the future. And visualization can be mental, it can be physical, like a blueprint for a house, or a foundation or framework that is carefully planned and executed before any construction happens. What this looks like in the business world is that some people like to just jump into projects before they even begin without planning, but they can work well. That strategy works well often for very simple and small number of people, small teams. But when it comes to very complex or interdisciplinary projects with different departments, a framework of guidelines needs to be set so that everyone knows the rules to the game, and we can avoid pitfalls and blind spots to ensure that the item is delivered on time and in good quality. So what this looks like is often projects are not ran at the same pace. Sometimes the project moves fast at the beginning and slow at the end, or slow at the beginning and ramps up fast at the end, or there's a bottleneck in the middle of the project to where progress cannot begin until a certain amount of sequential actions are complete. So this setup looks like is when you've planned through the project from beginning to end, you notice the bottleneck, you have time to mitigate the bottleneck rather than coming up to the bottleneck at the time and having to make a panic decision. So those were our 6 elements of the setup paradox. Number 1, create space. Number 2, smooth transitions. Number 3, empathy or thinking like the target. Number 4, eliminating the trigger. Number 5, investing in today. And number 6, visualizing the future. At the end of each video, I always like to link this video back from the conscious mind to the unconscious mind and give you something to sleep on. So the question today is, tell us how you're going to use the setup paradox for the next big project in your life. And you can leave a comment, or you can send an email to samthonium@gmail.com, and we will look them over and maybe share your story in a next episode. Also in the comments, you can tell us about a time where you noticed that this setup had actually prepared you and allowed you to execute much easier. It's always good to hear success stories. Thanks for watching, and I hope that the setup paradox will help you execute better in your day-to-day business.